Sharing voices, building worlds. The Ampliverse.
Welcome to the Autistic Delicatessen.
What you eat, what you drink, is your story.
So when you eat with awareness, you want to eat what you already think you are.
When they're looking at history, looking at our food, there's just so much to bring people together.
Come get this love. Come get this love.
Today's guest is Jacques LaMore, host of the Pop Punk and Pizza Podcast, a weekly podcast that features local and international artists and bands like Real Big Fish, Bowling for Soup, and Less Than Jake, all discussing their music and, of course, eating pizza, even showcasing some songs from the pop punk scene. Jacques used to be in a pop punk band called The Projection as the lead vocalist and guitarist, along with being a morning radio host in Illinois. Hey, Jacques boy, welcome to the Autistic Delicatessen.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I feel I was looking through the previous episodes and just looking at all the different guests that you've had, and I feel very honored to be included just because I feel like most of your guests are like directly in the line of food, and I guess there are some music artists, but regardless, I just feel honored to just be included in your awesome lineup of guests. So thank you so much, Oni and Larnell, for having me.
And I'm sure, no problem on that front. And also, I like the theme music because for the Pop Punk and Pizza, it's very catchy. I just feel like that could have been a hit, though, because since I'm autistic, since this is the Autistic Delicatessen, I just felt like stimming to that. It's like stem dancing, like stimming to that song, just like this and that and all that stuff, like, hey, hello, it's nice to meet you. Hey, come in and have a slice of pizza, like all that stuff. It's like eat. It's like, it's just like a nice feeling right there. And I'm sure Oni does the same thing, right?
I love it. When I first started the theme song, I'm like, oh, this is great. And it's just fits the punk theme as well. It just fits itself back at home. It's great.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, I wanted something obviously that was pop punk because that's what the podcast was going to be all about. So it turned out much better than I thought. The only thing I did with the theme song was just give the songwriter, he asked me who some of my favorite pop punk bands were, and of course I told him Green Day and Yellow Card and Goldfinger, and he was familiar with those. His name is Jeff. I'm forgetting his last name just because it's been so long since it was written. It was written back in 2016, and I honestly haven't talked to him since then. So, which I feel really bad. I need to look. I've been asked this question multiple times, and I always feel bad because I always forget Jeff's last name. Yeah, Jeff did a phenomenal job on nailing the whole aesthetic of the show and did it in a very catchy way. He actually has recorded and written several podcast intros and jingles and things like that. So when I was in the process of getting Pop Punk and Pizza off the ground, I did some research on, okay, who writes podcast intros or podcast songs or podcast jingles, and his name kept coming up in these Google searches. So I reached out to him, and I'm glad that the reviews were exactly what I got out of it. The only thing that now, since the spring of 2020, there's a new version of the theme song that we use now that is actually performed and sung by Chris DeMakes of Less Than Jake. It's the same song. It's just done by Chris because Chris is one of my favorite ska, punk, pop punk people. And he, at that time in 2020 with the pandemic, he was stuck at home. Less Than Jake was not on the road. So Chris was like, I got to make money. So he started writing songs for fans all across the world. And I thought, why not have Chris do it, have his own spin on it? And so that's the version that you currently hear. on each episode, spanning, like I said, spanning from about spring of 2020.
And I just have to say that I really like the second version, because the first version, it sounded okay, but the second version that you said, the lead vocalist of Less Than Jake did that, that's the one I really like. I was like, oh, I'm sold to this. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it just made sense. It really brought a whole dynamic to the show. And especially since the person singing the theme song is someone that's well known in the scene, it just kind of completed the picture.
That is awesome though, and especially how you got like someone prominent to sing the theme song. It just gels well amazingly. It's like the final piece of the puzzle kind of thing. Where did you start before your podcast? I noticed that you worked in radio before.
Yes, I still work in radio, but I'm starting this year. I've been doing that part-time because I'm transitioning to trying to do more in podcasting, whether it's recording my own podcasts or it's recording someone else's and editing someone else's, just trying to get my foot more in that door of being a full-time podcaster. So it's kind of funny so I started podcasting in 2014 because that's when I was going to broadcasting school. I signed up for a 1-year program at a school in Illinois called Illinois Media School. And they taught you all the facets of broadcasting, whether it was internet or TV or radio. They just kind of threw all of those in there and went over all of them in a year program. And at the start of that, in the summer of 2014, I really wanted to be in radio. Radio is where I wanted to be. And one of my instructors, who's now one of my best friends, shout out to Don. We call him Dr. Don, even though he's not a doctor. He had a podcast of his own, and he's the one that kind of introduced me to the world of podcasting. And I thought, well, I'm going to start my own podcast because I need some type of experience behind the mic if I want to land a job in radio as a radio host, as a radio personality. So my very first podcast was called Bangarang Radio, and that was named after the death of Robin Williams happened right around that same time. And I was a huge Robin Williams fan, and Bangarang is one of the things they shout in the Hook movie. I don't know if you ever saw Hook. Either one of you have seen Hook. I'm sure you have at some point or another. That's like what the Lost Boys shout. They go Bangarang, and so that's where that name came from. And so Bangarang Radio was just it was an entertainment podcast. So it was all over the place between music and movies and just pop culture in general. So it wasn't really fixated on any certain niche. And then a couple of years go down the road, and I didn't feel like I was getting anywhere. And that's where Pop Punk and Pizza came into play, because I kept reading from all these podcast articles and podcast experts saying, you gotta be more specific. You have to be as specific and niche as possible. And I love pop punk because I have grown up listening to the genre. I played it, and I love pizza as well. I fit into that whole stereotype. So that's where Pop Punk and Pizza was born.
And I'm just wondering, even during your days of being in a pop punk band, when you would before shows or after shows, would you ever in the different cities, or at least the different parts of in Chicago, counties or Illinois, would you ever visit pizza places? And is that kind of where your fascination came from? Or did this start when you were a kid or something like that was just fascinated by different pizza places?
I think pizza obviously came first before discovering the punk world of music. I feel like I didn't start to get super obsessed with pizza probably until more in your pre-teen years or your teenager years. That's when I really started to get obsessed with it. But of course, that's when I really started to get obsessed with punk music too. It's so funny you say that because a lot of the times after shows, we wouldn't go to pizza places. We would end up going to like Denny's or Steak and Shake because they were always open late. So the band and I would usually wind up going there instead. And unfortunately, they did not have pizza. But I'm sure it started out at a young age where I remember there was one point where it was like every Friday in my house, and I feel like a lot of Americans probably do this or did do this. Every Friday night was pizza night. And there were some times where my mom would actually make homemade pizza as well. And that was always, so cool and like a special treat. It was like homemade pizza. You couldn't beat it. So yeah, I guess maybe it all started then.
That's really cool. Also, homemade pizza is always the best.
Right? Yeah.
Always. I mean, my partner makes homemade pizzas and they're the best. And I make pizza swirls occasionally. So it's just so much fun to make the sauce and that. So
Especially if you're making like whole wheat crust, like actual legitimate whole wheat pizza crust, it just always tastes better.
funny enough, my partner once done an experimental crust. It was the crust was basically the whole base and crust was like a Yorkshire pudding. So it was like a Yorkshire pudding pizza fusion, but it worked really well. It was, oh my God, he needs to make it again.
I was going to say, make it and I will come to your house and try it because I'm always down to try something new,
Yeah, definitely.
So,
But with the pizza and punk connection, as you love both so much, was that a thing that just naturally gelled together to create the idea for the podcast?
it was it really just, once I sat down to really think about a niche and really narrow down on the things that I was passionate about most, those two things came together and it just clicked. And immediately it was like, okay, so what are we going to call this thing? So I remember coming up with a list of potential names and putting a post on Facebook for my friends to get their input on and be like, okay, what do you think sounds good? And I can't think of what some of those other names were. I'd have to go back. I'm sure I could find the post on Facebook and see, or maybe I've got the list laying around somewhere to where I could see what some of the other names were besides pop punk and pizza. And most punk bands, most rock bands, they like pizza. Everybody loves pizza. I guess it doesn't really matter what genre of music you're coming from or what your race is. I mean, most people love pizza. So, and the fact that I was like, yeah, I know so many pop punk bands in the Chicago area scene. We'll just get together, we'll sit down, we'll eat pizza, and we'll just talk about whatever. We'll talk about pop punk. We'll talk, because sometimes you randomly go off and you start talking about Pokemon or a TV show or whatever it might be. You kind of just let the conversation just go naturally. And so it did. It was instantaneous. It just worked.
I would say this just to throw in there, like, it would be good on your podcast if I don't know if you had some, but, probably some Black punk rock bands and all that stuff. There's this, I don't know if you heard this, like, site or anything like that, but it's called Punk Black, where you can find some punk bands over there, even in the Chicago area or something like that. It's out of Atlanta and all that stuff. So they have like different, like, Black, like POC, like bands there and all that stuff. I follow them on Instagram. So that's another good place to find other bands or something like that. So
I'm going to write that down. I've actually never heard of that. You said Punk Black, you said?
Yeah, Punk Black, yeah.
Okay, yeah. No, and to answer your question, yes, I have had members from pop punk bands or punk-oriented bands or whatever that are Black, and they're in pop punk bands. So I remember I had Magnolia Park on the podcast before they were signed to Epitaph. So that would have been sometime in 2020. Their Cleveland Avenue is a band from the Chicagoland area, and they have African American members. Oh, there's other ones that I can't think of. Those are always like the first two that pop up in my brain. I said Cleveland Avenue. Fluorescence is another one from the Chicago area. They have African American members. Yeah, so it's good to know that I'm definitely going to look up that website. I appreciate that, Larnell. It's always good to see what else is out there, but really in the grand scheme of things, it's exciting to see more of the racial mixes in pop punk, and not just races, but obviously people from different backgrounds of gender or non-binary, like getting into pop punk more or being accepted more, and seeing that, hey, it's not just a male fronted genre. There are people that are female or gay or lesbian or however they identify, starting to see more of that in the pop punk scene, which is just beautiful, because there's all those stereotypes about pop punk that I would like to see go away.
Also, to know that the whole punk genre, when you think about it, like, this is what I've learned in recent years, is that it wasn't originally from white people. It was from Black people that invented the punk rock genre and all that stuff. So to see some even Black punk rockers in that, it's really to show like really the history to real, like, in Black music, like Black music has always been diverse, that's the other thing, because sometimes even within the audiences, it's just like, there's still some, like, from what I've witnessed and all that stuff, so lesser Black people in there, but some are like very inclusive, very mixed with Black, Latin, Latinx, different ones, in there, being able to like mosh, being able to vibe with each other, so it's good that there's spaces that are open to that. And I think they've always been open to that, but it's good to see more of that and all that stuff, to show that, again, punk rock is not just a white space. It's not just a white male thing.
Yes, exactly. It was meant to be, and it's always meant to be for everyone. Where whatever your background is, you're supposed to be welcomed, anytime, anywhere. It's supposed to be for everybody. So yeah, and that's that. Like, going back to what you were saying about African Americans being involved in the push for punk rock. I mean, you can go even way back further to rock and roll and R&B and jazz and all that stuff. And the link really does go back to the African American community on that, or the Latin community as well. I mean, just thinking about, Oni is wearing a Real Big Fish shirt. Real Big Fish is a ska punk band. Ska comes, from the African American community, and I think a lot of people actually don't realize that. They just think that, oh, this is some goofy genre that was invented in the 90s by a bunch of California dorks,
And I just want to make a correction, like, sure, like the jazz elements come from the African American, like Black American jazz tradition, but also ska itself, it actually came from the Jamaican side, the reggae side, the roots reggae type of stuff, the vibes. That's where that came from.
Yes, thank you for the correction. That's what I meant to say. But yes, so it's just really fascinating how all of that comes around. But yeah, Jamaican to African Americans, it's just amazing what their contributions were to modern music.
That's what I love about music, how it comes around, how it expands, and how they encourage it for everybody. When it comes to punk music, I love my pop punk and my punk and my hardcore punk, and I'm trying to think. There's some. I mostly listen to German punk these days. I just love it. And there used to be a site called Punk Radio, but it's gone now. But there's another one, and it's like, the idea of the radio station is like the actual theme of punk, the whole anarchy and that. But the music's like rough sounding, but I love it because that's like full on punk. But I do love pop punk, and it always makes me feel positive and in a great mood. And also Tony Hawk's helped friggin' punk music in the mainstream, Tony Hawk music.
Yes, absolutely.
But one of my favorite bands of all time is a punkish Japanese band called Bomb Factory, and their music was featured on Dead or Alive 2, in the video game. There's a few underground Japanese pop punk stuff, and they're just really interesting to look into. It's like if you find Bomb Factory, you'll probably find the rest. So, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah, Japan loves punk music, and it's so funny you mention that, because I'll see sometimes when I'm looking at the Apple podcast charts on like where your podcast is charting, and a lot of times Japan is on the list for pop punk and pizza, and it makes sense because so many American punk bands do so well going to Japan. Japanese people just eat it up.
Yeah, because it's very interesting though, like really how they can make punk bands and really just like vibe out to like the whole scene right there. Also, Jacques, I want to just get to this. What is your favorite pizza? Like even out of like all the guests that you've had, like, you know, what's your go-to place? It can be local, it can be like just a chain pizza restaurant. Like what is your go-to with pizza?
You know, there's been very few times that I've met a pizza I didn't like. Except if it had, I don't like pizza with a ton of veggies on it. I'm not usually into that, but I'll eat it if that's what's there. I do love, there's a place just down the street from me that's called Chicago Dough, and their pizza is amazing, always amazing. As far as some of the Chicago chains, I love Lou Malnati's, and it just had Giordano's the other day. Most people are familiar with either one of those, whether you're in the Chicago area or not. You usually have heard of those two. We were there for my girlfriend's cousin was celebrating her birthday, so we went there and had the classic Chicago stuffed pizza, or the deep dish pizza that you see where the sauce is on top and the cheese is underneath the sauce. That's always good. There's another place that I love in the suburbs of Chicago called Nona's. And what's great about Nona's is they give you this gigantic slice of pizza, and it's like $5 or $6. And this slice of pizza is so big that they have to cut it in half. It's literally like a quarter of a pizza is really what it is. So, you know, a pizza has like you can make it into 4 quarters. Well, they literally give you a quarter of the pizza as one slice. And that's what makes it so incredible and so worth it. And what's even better is that one of Nona's locations is open 24 hours. So that just, you know, you can go there anytime and get yourself a ginormous slice of pizza. And it just, in fact, I always like to point out that in the early days of the band Real Friends, they loved to go to Nona's. You would see them at Nona's all the time. I don't know if they still frequent that spot, but I know that used to be one of their hangouts, as well as a lot of other pop punk, emo, you know, post-hardcore bands in the Chicago area. Like everyone was always going to Nona's.
That's so
Yeah.
cool.
That's interesting there, you know. But anyway, real quick, shout out to Joy Boy out in Birmingham, Alabama, and all that stuff. You know, I got their shirt back when they were in South Florida, so that's a shout out to them. I don't know if they can be guest on your show, but that could be an idea. So,
what's their name again?
I'm Joy Boy.
Joy Boy. Okay, I'm gonna write that one down. Yes.
Well, anyway, Jacques, we like to thank you for coming on to the Autistic Delicatessen and just giving us good pizza. And for people out there, if you want to check out Pop Punkin' Pizza, you can check it out on, if I'm correct, Jacques, like on all social media platforms like Apple Music, Spotify, you know, like wherever people can get their podcasts, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Everything, all the major podcast platforms. And you can find links to those at poppunkpizzapod.com. And all of our socials are at poppunkpizzapod as well. It's a lot of P's, but it gets the job done. So yes.
Well, once again, Jacques, thank you so much for being on. Okay, like really appreciate it.
Cheers.
Yeah, it's an honor. This is a lot of fun. Thank you, Oni, and thank you, Larnell. This has been a great time, and I hope both of you have some great pizza at some point today.
Thank you for watching the Autistic Delicatessen. If you want to know anything more about our show, please go on to theampliverse.com/the-autistic-delicatessen, and you can find both our podcast and YouTube series there.
And if you enjoyed our content, feel free to subscribe for future episodes. Until next time.
What you eat and what you drink is your story.